discussion to be led by the Director of Municipal Services, Pam Alexander. She's going to outline what the certificates of participation process really will entail should we choose to go this route. I would highly recommend that at the conclusion of Director Alexander's time with us, that everybody have their questions answered. That will help you to be able to think and prepare for a vote tomorrow night on whether or not we will have the certificates of participation process be the one that we use. But in order to really get there, now's the time to sort of ask those big, broad questions so that we can have lots of certainty with the path that we may be choosing. Director Alexander, I know you've worked hard. Your staff has put in a lot of time. We also have some good news, so I'm anxious to hear what you have to share with us today.
Okay, well, thank you, Mayor and City Council. I also want to let you know we do have some virtual attendees this afternoon, and we have Christian Anderson, who is our municipal advisor. You probably remember Christian, so he's virtually available if any specific questions come up. We also have our bond council representative, Adam Christensen. So it's Christian Anderson and Adam Christensen, which is, believe it or not, I flip-flop it sometimes. And then finally, we also have the balance of our finance team, Mark Hagedorn, our city controller, and Josh Bruce, our city treasurer. So they're kind of hunkering down with distancing over at the City Hall building. So today, as the mayor has indicated, we're going to talk about the certificates of participation overview and where we're at with the project. So today we're going to talk about the update on our project financing activities. We are going to do a high-level ordinance review that you should have received in your packet. It is a very long document, so thank you for those who had a chance to look at it. We also will do a brief overview of resolution, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And then we're also going to talk about next steps. So first of all, as I mentioned about, maybe 3 weeks ago, we had a lot of financing activities that we were going to be doing over the next 2.5 weeks or so. And just a reminder of who our certificates of participation finance team are. And as I mentioned earlier, we have our municipal advisor, Christian, is from Zion's Public Finance. He's out of Boise. We have Adam, who's part of our bond council. He's also out of Boise. Our underwriter, Stiefel, Nicholas & Company, they're out of Denver, and their underwriter counsel for their company is Skinner Fawcett out of Boise. We have our bond trustee is Zion's Bank Corporation, National Board, they're out of Boise. Our bond rating also was conducted last week. We did receive that notification, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few minutes. That was from Moody's, I believe out of San Francisco, California area, but Christian can correct me on that at a later time. And then finally we had our city finance team, which is myself, Mark, and Josh. And then finally we have our city legal, which is our city attorney, Randy Fife. So these group of individuals who've had multiple conference calls, and they have been working very steadily the past 2.5 weeks or so to be able to present this document to you that was in your packet. So you can really read my slide, but that's okay because I have notes. So the ordinance highlights that you see this a very large document that was in your packet. It basically is the document, the formal document that does the approval and authorization to issue the certificates of participation. The total appropriation is not to exceed $30 million. It is a tax-exempt obligation, and with a component of a true interest cost placeholder at 3.25%, and it's over a 22-year term. So the elements of the ordinance include a primary lease, an annual appropriation lease agreement, an annual appropriation trust indenture, a primary official statement, information reporting agreement, and certificate of participation agreement. So there's all those agreements kind of wrapped up into one, and that is what our municipal advisor and our underwriters and our city attorneys have been working, not only our city attorney, but also our bond council attorney. And so that's just a real high-level overview of what is in the ordinance as far as documentation. The other element of the ordinance is it provides for a delegation of authority to the mayor and the director of municipal services to approve, if you will, the sale of the certificates. Because what we don't want to do is get a really good package together and then have to come to city council. So there is a delegation section in there that allows the mayor and the Municipal Services Director to sign those sales of certificates.
That's simply a timeliness issue.
It is.
It's not
absolutely.
a lack of desire to bring it to council. It's just a matter of you want to execute it instantaneously.
Correct. And if you remember, our municipal advisor, Christian, talked a lot about how things are going to happen really quickly on that day. And so it allows the city to be in the best possible position to get the best possible prices and interests and things of that nature for the actual certificates themselves. And then finally, the ordinance does approve and provide authorization to execute a primary lease. And if you remember, the primary lease is that annually it would come to council for the approval as an appropriation. And it's a lease to purchase mechanism through our certificate of participation. So the next item that is in there in your packet is also the resolution. And what the resolution does is a notice to intent to reimburse for certain project expenditures, because we have had some project expenditures associated with the police facility over the last several weeks. And what it allows for, it allows for the city to be able to go back and request reimbursement for those costs that we spent prior to the issuance of the certificates. So once the certificates are sold, they'll go into a trustee account, and we can actually reimburse ourselves for any costs that we incurred prior to the sale of those certificates. And if you recall, there is a specific time frame in order for us to be able to do so. So that's one of the reasons that we have the resolution in place. It also ensures that we are complying with the Code of Federal Regulations. So that's a little bit about what that document is. I highlighted that document. Whoops, I went too far. Okay, so I don't know if you remember, we talked a few weeks ago about the critical piece of the certificates of participation will be the interest. And again, we're trying to leverage, if you will, our current climate with interest rates. And it also was contingent on our bond rating. And so we did we did have a bond rating call on Tuesday, November 10th, and it was the finance team and the other consultants that are outside of this organization, as well as the mayor. And we did receive our bond rating on Friday, this past Friday. And I'm pleased to say that our bond rating, that Moody's has assigned us an A3, specifically for the COPs, and that was expected. That was what we were hoping to get, and that was what we were expecting to get. And so, congratulations on mayor, city council, and all of the people that were behind the scenes making this happen to make sure that we had a good portfolio, if you will, of documents and a really good review of what our organization, how our organization is performing, as well as we're growing. And that was something that the Moody's group talked a lot about, is this area is really growing. So that's a really great honor to receive that rating. It is really great because what that does is it allows us to compete for some really good rates. So now we'll be looking at the certificates of participation pricing, and that's something that our municipal advisor, Christian Anderson, will be leading that on, and he and I will be working together with that. And we anticipate that to be December 8th, and then a closing date of December 23rd. So that's just a little high overview on that, on just the rating and how the certificate timelines work. Also, just to update the bar chart, we updated it with the true value interest that you saw in the documents over the weekend, the 3.25%. We were kind of playing with some other percentages during previous presentations because, again, the market is changing. And our municipal advisor is recommending and feels a conservative 3.25% interest rate would be suitable. So we've incorporated that into this bar chart. So again, it's kind of hard to see, but if you look here, a 22-year, we would be paying approximately $12.4 million in interest. Just as a reminder, we have to at least enter into this for at least a 10-year period. After 10 years, we can talk about making up some of the payments and being able to perhaps reduce that interest and reduce the debt, or what do you call it, accelerate it. But we're locked in for at least a 10-year period. And then also, based on the 3.25%, we're looking at two interest payments. One would be in March after we close, and another one would be in September. And the total right now is about $1.996 million for that first payment. So that just gives you a little bit of a little background on that. And then finally, as I said here, that we've said before, is in our current fiscal year budget, we have a capacity for a $2 million payment every year because it's currently in the base of this fiscal year. $1 million of it is set aside for the police department for the actual payment of the interest payments, so that's $1 million. And then also we have some one-time projects that were awarded this year that those funds should go back into the base budget for perhaps additional payments towards this lease to round it out to $2 million. And so the next steps are to adopt the certificate of participation ordinance, and it's scheduled to go on City Council tomorrow evening, November 24th. Also, after that, they adopt the resolution, and again, that would be to reimburse any project expenses that we have, and that would also be on tomorrow evening. And then you'll hear less from me and more from the design and construction project team. And then I also just added this really quickly. It's just a real quick visual because I believe Councilmember Francis kind of wanted to see a little bit of a visual on this. And so this is just a little bit about the appropriation procedure. So, there would need to be a notice of intent to renew, and that would be notice to the trustee on or before August 1st of each year. And then the notice to renew would go out, and that would have to be provided to the trustee no later than September 15th. And then if I scooch down just a little bit, thank you, Mayor, for helping me here. Payment of the rent, the lease term begins October 1st, and the payments would be 15 days in advance of the debt service. So right now it's placeholder at March 1st and September 1st. So, like I said, I do have both our municipal advisor and also our bond council representative on the line. If you have any questions that are very specific to financing that perhaps I didn't address in this presentation.
Pam, I have a question. I don't know which Mr. Anderson this would go to, but it gets to the two different methods of construction and whether or not one method helps the interest rate over the other method. I always have leaned towards a fixed price, and I thought a fixed price might have more of a positive impact on the interest rate than letting it build and pay, build and pay. So I just wondered if that impacts it at all.
I'm going to see if Christian maybe has some experience. He has experience with these already, so I'm going to see if he has anything that he'd like to add first.
Yeah, thank you. Mayor and Council, as for that question, it really kind of depends on, well, let me just state, it is a question sometimes for the rating agencies where they would become concerned if there's not a guaranteed max price contract on a financing, if they are concerned that the estimates on the cost of the project are too low, or just seem egregious, or if they're concerned that the city or the issuer would not have the flexibility to either resize the project, make adjustments, or have the liquidity to put in additional cash to complete the project. For this particular project and for the city in particular, this was not a concern of the rating agency, and we would not expect it to have any impact whatsoever on the pricing of the certificates.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question.
Councilor Radford, go ahead.
And you said that growth was one of the things that Moody's, did you say Moody's was good?
Councilor, yes, I did. It was Moody's rating agency.
Okay. And, one of my things about that rating is it's one of the things that's been discussed in the working group for property tax adjustment is that we would no longer get growth. What's your thoughts on that?
Councilmember Radford, that is absolutely correct. There is some proposed legislation that's been discussed, but the good news is that, as I mentioned earlier, the $2 million is already in our base. It's already in our base budget. As I mentioned earlier, we have $1 million that's been dedicated to the police department, another $1 million that has been dedicated to another department for a one-time project. The goal of that is for next fiscal year, it will become part of our, it's currently part of our base this year, and it would be available next fiscal year to use towards this repayment.
So my follow-up thought process here is, I just worry that we're taking a risk here of 10 years until we can change this once we get started. If the tax environment changes, then I'm worried we don't have a lot of flexibility to change that. And we'll be locked into this $2 million and maybe not have the ability to have growth come to us. And then suddenly we've made our choice about $2 million every year in the budget for 10 years, and it really takes away our flexibility. That's seemingly a concern of mine about this process, whereas if we went with a bond election, then that new revenue would all be there, and then the $2 million would stay in the general fund, and we would have flexibility for that. So just a thought process that I have.
All right, thank you for expressing that. Are there any who would like to comment on that?
Yes, I would, Mayor.
Councilor Halley.
I think that, if I'm not mistaken, we were told that the bond process would, at this point, would take us much longer to get involved. And the cost, with a real threat for rising interest rates, the longer we go out, the more likely that the interest rate's going to increase. So it might appear up front that bonding would be cheaper, but that's if you could do it right now, and we can't do it right now. You got to go through a lengthy process, and that might get us into higher interest rates. My second comment is the lack of an adequate police facility impacts the operation of the police department and lowers, in my opinion, the ability of the police department to function as efficiently as it could. And when it does that, we're open to lawsuits. And there is an opt-out. There's a lot of things that we don't know about. We don't know what the legislature is going to do. What we do know is redevelopment district, the largest one we've ever had in the city, ends in 2028, and that'll be additional funds that would be available. But that's my comments, Mayor.
Well, thank you. I would just point out, too, just a quick note that a general obligation bond places then an additional burden on the taxpayers above and beyond their city tax, property tax payment. By going with a certificate of participation model, with that $2 million already being in our base, it essentially means that we are assuming responsibility for paying for it within our property tax, the limit that we already, within the property taxes that we already collect. Therefore, it's a kindness, in my mind, a great kindness to city residents, because we're not saddling them with both city taxes that we use for all sorts of purposes, plus the obligation of the bond itself. In this case, it's all just one bill, and it is, well, I already said it, it's a kindness. Other thoughts?
Just
comment from...
If I may, real quickly, just to clarify, we did not levy a property tax this fiscal year, and so the money that has been kind of culminated, if you will, is with new growth and new construction, which is what the city has earned in previous years. And so I just want to clarify that there was no property tax levy this fiscal year because we decided to participate in the governor's plan for the public safety relief program.
Mayor, this is Jim.
Thank you.
I just got my tax bill today, and it was down $330 or something for the year. So, yeah, the governor's tax relief just came through for me today. On another note, I'm just curious about how we ended on the 22%. If somebody could walk me through that. Or 22 years, excuse me. I don't remember ever making that decision, and maybe I just forgot. So can someone walk me through that, please?
Sure. So originally it was 30-year, and we talked about different thresholds. Do we want to do a 25? Do we want to do a 20? And 22 was actually what we had. 22 years was actually what we had available between the interest rate and the payment. What the payment would look like. So it's kind of like when you buy a car, right? You look at how much you can afford, and then based on that, you have the loan for the amount of years. And so it was a proposal that we had that I believe we had when we talked on November 9th. We were kind of looking in that threshold range of 22 years because we felt that that's what we could pay based on, the payment would be based on what we thought the interest rate would look like.
It's certainly within the purview of the council to pick a different time frame. This was just the way that we could maximize what we could readily identify. We could pick a shorter time frame if you can come up with more money, more than the $2 million, and you could pick a longer time frame if you want to spend less than the $2 million. Just know that the interest paid is the variable there. Council President Zildjian had some comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to comment that I'm supporting the 22-year, but Mayor's absolutely right. Councilors, if we wanted to change that to something else and look at a different proposal, then we can. It does allow us to, I think, save the most amount of interest while creating a budgetary situation that I do think we have capacity for. As Director Alexander mentioned in her response to Councilor Radford, we were able to budget this item under the circumstances of not, taking the 3%. But at the end of the day, each year, our council makes priorities. And I would time and time again say that this is my top priority, for particularly for capital expenditures, and I would be advocating for this over and over and over again. And so I don't see any benefit to two things. I don't see any benefit to delaying this, which is going to increase our construction costs, period, end of story. You guys have all seen what happens when we delay even 2 or 3 months sometimes, the increase in costs. It's absolutely crazy. So I don't see any reason to delay this due to construction costs in part. But secondly, I'm supporting this because as Councilor Freeman stated, property tax payers have received the benefit thanks to the governor's plan, and this allows us to have our residents enjoy that benefit. This is really spending within our means. This is spending within the budget and being able to accomplish a law enforcement building. It is complex. It does take 22 years to do so, but one of the benefits is that taxpayers are not going to see this as an additional cost. We're going to be able to live within the budgetary guidelines that we've gone forth with. So I think that's just one of the positives I wanted to mention. Thanks, Mayor.
Mayor.
Thank you. Councilor Halley.
Yes, Director Alexander, as I remember, we did focus on 20 years, not 22 years, but I think the payment, and correct me if my memory is wrong, was going to be $2.2 million a year to do it at 20 years. So we come down to $1,900,000 and some, we'll call it $2 million for simplicity, and and that fits our budget outlook going forward, and so it's more flexible for us to go out to 22 years to get that lower payment.
Councilor Heller, that is absolutely correct. When we went back and we looked at the 3.25%, we were right in that ballpark, 1.996, I believe I had said earlier, and that would be at a 22-year threshold.
Other questions, concerns? Councilor Francis.
Yeah, I have actually a series of questions here. So when we talk about the 3.25% interest rate, is that somewhere it says that not to exceed? Does that mean it could come in lower than that?
It could, and I'm going to hand that over to Christian to talk a little bit about the true interest cost. There's a whole strategy on setting it at a conservative rate. Christian, do you want to walk through that really quick? Do you have time?
Sure. So, Mayor and Council, the purpose of the rate that's in the ordinance, and Adam can speak to this as well, is simply setting the parameters under which the certificate sale can be finalized without coming back for an additional board action. So if we were to sell these certificates today, we would come in well below that, and frankly, we would be in a position to hit that 20-year term while staying within that $2 million a year threshold. What we're simply trying to do is define a reasonable, conservative range to say, well, we still have a couple weeks before we price these, and if there's some news in the market, we're still hovering at just kind of the bottom of the bottom on interest rates. If we see a really definitive, let's say, light at the end of the tunnel for coronavirus, I could see that starting to push interest rates up. And so we simply said, okay, well, let's pick a conservative figure that is still a good rate. Historically speaking, 3.25 would be a fantastic interest rate. Let's pick a conservative figure that, as long as we're within this range, the council would feel comfortable having the delegated officers finalize that sale. If we could sell these certificates today, we would be below 2.5%. I think, and also we would fit in that 20-year term. So having 22 years simply gives us the flexibility that if rates start to climb in the next couple of weeks, where we can't fit it in 20 years and we cross over into 21 to stay in that $2 million threshold, we have the flexibility to do that, or again, up to 22 years, and the same with that interest rate. In reality, the rates are quite a bit better today. It's just defining a range the council is comfortable with for delegation.
Wonderful. So that indeed is a very conservative number, if, for example, if we were doing it today. So council members, I guess one thing that if we know that it's this variable, right, and subject to what's happening on December 8th, I just would like to ascertain, are you comfortable with this $2 million that we've identified so that Pam can continue to use that as her constant going forward? I see Shelley saying yes, Michelle saying yes. That it would be helpful for municipal services staff to know if you're going to move on that one. But if they have that threshold, then we could possibly set up a schedule where we pay this thing off a lot sooner. So that would be nice to know. Councilor Francis?
Yeah, I have the one concern on that is, as I remember when we did this budget to get to the $1 million for the ventilation system at the aquatic center, we knew we were adding to the red line in the rec fund. So I'm not sure technically I see that full $1 million being available without the rec fund not being set on a path to be corrected. I'm a little concerned about that. I was trying to calculate in my mind, if I were just doing this with my own money, I would say, what would payment be at the 25 maximum? And then after 10 years, start paying it off early, because if you put an extra $500,000 every year, you pay off $6 million really quickly. And that would reduce, we wouldn't actually have the 25 years, we would pay it off faster than that. But I know it's not, I can't tell what future council is going to do, and that's a long way down the road, so I better not plan that way. But I am a little concerned about being sure that we have that full second $1 million because of that rec fund. Because as I remember it, and I may be totally wrong here, when we went through how we were going to use the money that became available near the end in July, and we originally had maybe $750,000 for the ventilation system, and that wasn't going to be enough, so we actually intentionally allowed that rec fund to be a little bit more in debt for another year. Am I misremembering that?
Councilor, no, well, it's more of a yeah, but. So originally we did have about $750,000, but when we received the money, when we received the figures from the county, we actually had new growth and annexation of $1.4 million. And so that's why we were able to swing more money over to that particular project at the aquatic center. However, we also have some potential savings in some other areas as well. The only reason that we're identifying one-time projects, because that's in case what it was awarded at or it was approved at, a one-time project of up to, I believe it was $1,018,000, around that neighborhood. So that money would be available, if you will, for other projects or a contribution to this payment, this repayment.
Isn't it that element that always the first few years are going to be the tight ones, and gradually this will become, as long as that remains fixed, more and more affordable, assuming growth continues?
That would be correct. And like I said, it's kind of like buying a car. You know, when I bought my car, I knew what I could afford every month, regardless of whether or not I was going to get a new job or a raise or anything of that nature. That's what we're doing here,
Right.
in essence.
I would also just say that we're taking away choices in the future if we go to 2 million. I'm more comfortable sticking with the original number that we talked about, because I think there's flexibility at that year 10. I think we can accomplish the same thing along that was cost us, save the $12 million in interest when we get to year 10 and change the financing. But then it gives us flexibility for the next 10 years, especially next year when COVID, what if people didn't, you know, what do we know? We're in a time of unknowing about what's going to happen with taxes. It just feels a bit risky.
Okay. I'm not sure if I understood when you said original number discussed. I'm not sure what that meant.
Yeah, 1.3 was kind of, we were going to talk about that for over 30 years.
To clarify, I believe, Christian, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it was 1.6.
Was that for a 30-year term, the payment amount? I apologize.
Yeah.
I think that's what Councilor Radford is saying, yes.
Let's see. I did just, Mayor and Council, I did just run the numbers on the 25-year based on today's rates, and I'm coming out with about 1.7. The scenarios that I think you're referencing are a little bit older, but let me take a look at the amount there. Yeah, roughly 1.6. So I think, rates have come down a bit. Again, we're still trying to be conservative since we have a few weeks until those certificates actually priced. But yeah, I think 1.6, maybe even as low as 1.55 would be a conservative guess on a 30-year.
All right, just note that there would be another $5 million worth of interest, right? Roughly speaking.
But we do have the flexibility at year 10 to make the changes so that there isn't. If we can pay more in year 10, if we have it. What I'm saying is this gives us flexibility from year 1 to year 10. I mean, going in at $2 million or $2 million when next year we might have a tough budget year just makes me a bit nervous when we could be in at 1.6 or 1.7 and still have some more flexibility next year if we need to replace a DI or we need to there's always a need. And to be honest, the $2 million, we could spend that every year just on maintenance, and we could spend that for 30 years and still have maintenance. So it's not like we don't have a need for it.
All right, thank you, Councilor Radford. Other suggestions, other inputs? Did I see a Council President? Did you indicate you wanted to speak? Oh, okay.
Mayor.
Councilor Francis.
Yeah, how much flexibility can we go into this? In other words, what if it works out that for the $2 million we could do 20 years instead of 22? Is that something that could? Is that something that's worked out between now and December 23rd, or?
I'm going to defer that to Christian
Okay.
real quickly, if I could, Christian.
Nick, I apologize. Could you repeat the question?
Yes, what I'm wondering is how much flexibility do you as negotiators have from this council? So we have a limit, it can't be higher than 3.25%. But would it also mean that if things look good, you could do 20 years instead of 22 if we authorize not to exceed 22? Or if we said 25, you said, oh, well, we could do this at 22 and still keep it in that $2 million? Is that the kind of flexibility you normally would go into this with?
So we'll have the flexibility you provide in that ordinance. So again, it's mainly comes down to two things. One, which is in the ordinance, which is the maximum term. which again right now is drafted as 22 years. And then the second piece is for the council to direct a payment target. So what is the maximum payment that you're comfortable with? So again, we've been working off of a $2 million assumption, and then we went after that 22-year limit for the ordinance as a term we were comfortable we'd be able to achieve, even if rates were to tick up a little bit in the next couple of weeks. If you wanted to revise that to a lower payment target, we would just need to know what that is, and then we could update the ordinance accordingly. I think presumably what we would do is target the shortest term possible given the payment limit that you're comfortable with. So if you said we're comfortable with 1.8 million, we would make it as short as possible given that 1.8.
And if I could just clarify really quickly, I did find my notes from August 24th, the work session that we had on August 24th, and we did do a handout that for a $30 million lease with the COP, 20 years, at the interest rates they were at the time back in August, the payment would have been $1,990,000. So we're relatively close to that. And it's just the fluctuation with the interest of what we're dealing with right now until we sell.
So I'm going to point out, council members, that a couple of things, because I definitely have a bias on this one, and I just do. So I'm going to jump in and deliberate along with you, even though I don't vote. The first thought is that one of the primary differences between the certificates of participation methodology and the general obligation bond pathway is that this one does result in slightly higher interest. And so there was sensitivity on the part of municipal services and the financial team to try to work very hard to shorten the term as much as possible to be able to bring that interest rate down. And that is, I think, very desirable. I have only heard objections from 2 members of the public, but one of those members of the public has really jumped on this interest idea, saying that this costs so much more. But if we can identify, a guaranteed payment amount and specify, a not to exceed term that results in maybe a little bit of squirming this year and the next year and maybe year 3, but it gets easier over time, I do think that we'll be able to provide to the taxpayers in our city a great deal because they'll be getting something quicker than they would with the general obligation bond. We'll be putting ourselves at far less risk for that construction inflation. A rate of about 8 to 10% that we've been given that rate is significant, and delay tax on those costs. If we can avoid those costs plus deliver something that pays as little interest as possible, I think that would be desirable for taxpayers. I don't want to sell them or burden them with something that requires that a council 10 years from now start paying extra. I think that's asking a lot of the future council that we're going to heap on top of them keeping this going from year to year, that they're also going to suddenly decide to start paying more just to save interest. I think that's partly on how we structure it now. And so I'm in favor of the $2 million and the 22 max, rather than trying to bring that down, stretch it out longer.
Yeah, Mayor, I just make clear, I agree with you. I said if this was my own money, that's the way to go about it. But this is public money, and it's a different game. So the 22 years max, 3.25 max, and the 2 million max. If that's the standard, I can support it.
I can support that.
Additional thoughts? Questions? All right, then perhaps I'll ask one last question. Are we ready to bring this to the council? Well, it is on the agenda for tomorrow night. Does everybody feel prepared to be able to make their vote and feel that it will be an informed vote tomorrow evening?
Thumbs up for me.
All right, getting some thumbs up and some slight nods, and that will prove sufficient. I would like to thank Pam and then do a blanket thank you to everybody on slide 3 because there are an awful lot of folks who made this smooth and easy and possible. And Christian, thank you for that amazing formula you've got built into a spreadsheet there that you could just plug in the magical numbers and watch them change and spit out numbers for us. Thank you also to Adam and for bringing us that, 2A3? Is that what, or A23? Forget how to say it.
AA3.
AA3, there we go. And so maybe we're ready to move on to the next item. Any final comments?